Welcome back to another tutorial. This one is dealing with tiles that measure distances. So specifically in the context of a trap, we have a character here. He's about to walk around this corner. He walks around the corner. It triggers this rune on the far end of the hallway that's firing a beam down the hallway. The beam gets weaker as it travels down the hallway. So you take the least amount of damage on this end, and you take the most amount of damage on this end. Now, the way it works is the zone along here, in this animated portion, all it does is just detect that someone has entered it or has ended their movement in it, and then triggers the rune tile at the end, and the rune tile then measures the distance and then determines how much damage to do based on the distance. So we'll switch over to the GM view. And there's actually multiple different ways you can go about this. So I've got this set up in 3 different ways of doing it to demonstrate completely different tactics that you can take coming at this. Now, of course, another option beyond these 3 would be just write a macro to do it. But these tutorials are about Monk's active tile triggers. So that option is not going to get covered. Although one of the options, the very last one, is fairly math heavy. So if you're not comfortable with that, you probably want to skip that option, although it is the cleanest option. So the first one is this option down here. And this one doesn't actually measure any distances. So it is the most simplistic, basic, dumb version, not dumb as in you're stupid to use it, but in that it's not intelligent. It doesn't know anything. All that happens is when you step on each of the tiles in the zone, the tile just has manually set the amount of damage that is done. And then you copy and paste the tile over here and you manually change the damage that's done. And then you copy and paste the tile again and you manually change the damage that's done. And all this last tile does is just when someone steps on it, it turns off the trap. So this requires the least amount of thought, but it is clunky in that if you want to move this trap or reorient this trap, you've got to take each of these individual tiles and move them one at a time. Like say, for example, if the trap went out in this direction, you have to move the number 1 tile here, the number 2 tile over here, etc. Whereas this version, where it's actually measuring, if I want to change the trap so that it's on the other side, all I do is move the zone over there like that. Or if I want the trap to be vertical, then I move it up here and I just reshape it, resize it, whatnot. Obviously, you would change the graphic as well, but you get the point. Though this version and of course this version down here are more difficult to set up, because they are quote unquote smart versions of the trap, they are easier to reconfigure than the dumb version of the trap. But with this one, which is the one that I actually set up, this is the one that I came up with. These 2 were suggestions that were given to me when I asked in the Monk's Active Tile Trigger Discord if people had alternate ways of doing this, because I wanted to show multiple ways of doing it. These were suggested by 2 different users. This one, it was by Crowguard, who is the Chad, is a helper in the Discord. I assume he's also a moderator. He also does the wiki for Monk's Active Tile Triggers. So this one was also just a flex for him. It was when you see it, he's just plain showing off. But with this one, as you can see, the zone itself, the damage zone, is very simplistic. All it does is detect that someone has stepped on it, entered it, or they've entered their movement in it. And then it waits for 1/10 of a second. And the reason for that is sometimes timing can get a little confused. And then when it goes to do the distance calculation, you haven't finished your movement. You're sort of between tiles. So it stops the token movement and has the token sitting centered on the tile that it's on and it gives that a little bit of time for that to happen. And then it triggers the damage source and starts the measurements. That way we know that the token is actually sitting where we want it to be sitting and not like between tiles or whatever, and it can get confused. So let's move this back down first off. There we go. All right. Now, one thing that I did, you notice this animation here, the actual animation is only this big, right? And obviously that doesn't work. So I stretch the animation in the tile here, adjusting these ratios. But that results in the actual clickable portion of the tile extending much further than the boundaries of the tile. So if I unselect that tile for a second, so I have no tile selected, I hover over this tile, and you can see it highlights. But if I move the cursor just a little bit higher, it highlights that zone. That's how big that zone now is, which can make, like, I can't click on this tile here, right? So to get around that, one, you can just move the tile out of the way to get at the other tiles. But also over here, there is the tile sort button, which brings up this window here, which allows you to go along and select all of the various tiles from this menu. So when you have tiles overlapping each other and you find them difficult to work with, this is a handy way to be able to get access to them. And as you can see, whichever one you currently have highlighted changes color. So like this tile here, when I'm hovered over it, it turns green. So when you have multiple tiles, because it unfortunately it doesn't show the tile's name. It'd be very handy if it did that. And Monk, if you're listening, I would love you to add that. But all it shows is the name of the graphic that you're using. And if you have multiple tiles that are using the same graphic, like these glowing runes or energy beams or whatever, they can get a little confusing. So hovering over and seeing which one changes color allows you to zoom in on which one when you've got ones that use the same graphic. So for this one, what we're doing is we have on enter is a trigger, and stop within tile, which we don't actually need that one, and manual activate. And the manual activate is when it gets called, when it gets triggered by the zone. But for the enter, it's when you reach the end, that's you turning off the trap. So someone has reached the end of it, they've touched the rune or whatever, and the trap shuts off. And all it does is just it hides the graphic for the zone, it deactivates the zone, and it deactivates itself. Trap shuts off, and now people can move freely through the area without being harmed. For the manual trigger, where someone is in this zone, we're setting a variable for damage type, because my traps deal with damage type, and they use a macro for that because the heal harm action doesn't deal with damage types, and the attack action isn't compatible with the various modules involved with animation and automation, like needy quality of life, that kind of stuff, which are modules that I use. So to get around that, I wrote my own macro for that. But you can ignore that if you're setting up a version of this for yourself and you're just going to use heal harm or attack or whatever, then you just ignore this. But all it is setting a variable called damage type and is setting it to the product for the damage type of the trap. So we're filtering based on token distance. And this is where the smart part of the trap comes from, where it actually detects things. And so it's more dynamic. You don't have to statically set each and every step that someone does. So the triggering token is within one grid square of the center of this tile and continue on no matter what. Then we come down and we check entity count. So this, every time you do a filter, it creates a group. And in that group is everyone who passes the filter. So we check if there's more than 0 people, members of that group, which means there is someone in this range of one tile away. then allow it to continue on and do whatever you're going to do. If there isn't one person that's in that group, it means that the triggering tile is further away. It's more than 1 square away. So we check for 2 squares. So we go down to the landing of 2. As you can see, this gets very repetitive. And unfortunately, that's the non-heavy math way of doing it, is by doing it this way. So then if there is one, we come down here, we set the damage, and then we jump to the damage dealing section, which is down at the bottom. Then we check for if they're 2 away. So we do the same checks, check by distance, but instead of within 1 square, it's now within 2 squares. If there is someone, then set the damage. The damage reduces each one. So 15 dice, 14 dice. And then again, jump down to deal damage. If there isn't anyone in that group, then go down to landing 3 and check if they're within 3. Go down to landing 4 and check if they're within 4, and so on, all the way down to 12. And then for damage dealing, again, this is using my macro that deals with damage types, but you could just put in a harm heal instruction here, where you use the formula of damage dice. And again, it's a variable, so it's variable dot damage dice, 2 curly braces on either end, and then D6, which is the type of dice. And then you put it inside, the whole thing inside, 2 double square braces, which means that's a roll formula. And you can do it that way. It's done with a saving throw. So you do the saving throw, and here's the setup for the saving throw. It's a Constitution saving throw, DC 17. And past, you continue on with all tokens always. Then you have a redirect based on dice results, which goes to past, failed, and continue. In past, you're doing the damage, but you divide it by 2. In failed, you're doing the full damage, and then continue just goes down to the end of the script. And then if you have any extra stuff at the end, that's where you would put that. This one just stops at the continue. So the damage formula, if you're doing the half damage in past, you would just put a /2 here, and it would do half the damage. So that's all there is to that. Now, the other way of doing this, which is much more elegant and much shorter, and it's also measuring distance. So the zone itself is like this one. All it does is just detect if someone has entered the zone and trigger this tile. But there's a whole lot of math here. So this works entirely with variables. So in each of the variables, you're doing the various math steps involved in calculating distance. Now, I know very little about math and even less about geometry. I would Google how to do this and find out what the formula is. And then you simply, you create variables, you store the various values in the variables, you perform your math calculations on the variables. And again, because Krogard was just flexing and showing off, he actually did 2 different versions of the math. Apparently there are 2 different formulas for calculating distance, and he included them both just to show off. And you have your final calculation here, which calculates the distance in cells, how far away they are, distance in squares. So now you have a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's 2 different approaches you could go from that. One is you can use jump to landing and use the variable of the distance result as your landing labels, right? So if they're 1 tile away, they would jump to landing 1, 2 tiles away, landing 2, 3 tiles away, landing 3. So this is one way of doing it. And depending on what it is you want to do with your measurements, this may be the way to do it. But in this particular case, where all we want to know for distance is determining how much damage you're doing, what you could do instead is down here in this section is just immediately go to your, like you could jump down to this landing. So replace this jump to landing with, instead of variable distance cells, just jump to landing damage. Or you could just put all of these lines here right underneath this variable calculation and not jump at all. I did it this way so that I could show both methods. So you have your saving throw, and then you have your standard redirect that goes to past, failed, and continue. And then for your hurt and heal, you just go variable dot number of dice, D6, and in this case, divided by 2 because it's the past. So as you can see, this is much shorter, much less repetition, much more efficient, but you got to put your math hat on to do it. So those are 3 different ways to do it. I did come up with a 4th way to do it that involved a loop, but unfortunately, in the distance check action, which is in this tile, if I got the right one, yes. The filter by distance, unfortunately, you can't put a formula or variable name in this field, which is what you would need to do if you're going to do it with a loop. And currently, Monk's Active Tile Triggers doesn't support that. A request has been put in by CrowGuard, thanks Crow, to have that feature added. I don't know if Monk is going to add it or not, or how long it's going to take for it to be added. But if that was added, you could then do a loop, and inside the loop have a variable for the distance that you're checking, rather than copy pasting all this over and over and over again 12 times. So there's a bunch of different ways for doing the same thing, tackling the same problem, where you can have it measure the distance using repeated checks over and over and over again, each check for one square larger distance. You can have the dumb version or the non-smart version of the trap, where you just manually set each of the tiles, and you would just copy paste these tiles and edit them out for as far as you wanted to go for your range. And then you can also go with the much more efficient math heavy version of just setting variables, because in a tile that sets a variable, you can also use variables. So you can put in formulas, reference variables, reference attributes. If you know the like token X, for example, which is the X coordinate of the token, that's a stored value within Foundry. So if you know those, or you know how to look them up, you could do it this way. So if you're inclined to do so, I would recommend this method, simply because it is so much more efficient. But if you want to stick with something more simplistic, you don't want to stretch your math muscles, then either this method, if you're just going for brute force and ignorance, or this method, if you actually want it to be dynamic and do the calculations and you don't mind a bunch of repetition in the tile. This version of the trap, I'm not including all 3 versions, but this version of the trap is included in my module, which is linked down in the description, along with my Discord channel. If you want to get in touch with me, ask any questions, make any suggestions or requests. And that's it. Hopefully this wasn't too confusing. If you do have any questions, leave them down in the comments or contact me on my Discord. Talk to you later.